Okay, hello and welcome to Let's Talk Leadership with me, Charlie Swords. Today, I would like to introduce you to Liz Dillon, author and radio presenter. And Liz currently presents the Conscious Living Show on Dublin City FM. Liz has 35 years teaching experience, up to and including a leadership and management role. She is the author of Taking Flight, The Caged Bird, and she has also co-authored We Summit Together. Now, in our conversation today, Liz will share her experiences from her life awakening in the context of how those lessons and concepts still very much apply to those facing challenging times in their management and leadership positions. So Liz, you are very welcome, and thank you for joining me here today and for sharing your wisdom and your insights.
You know, Charlie, it's a real privilege. It's a privilege to be able to share some of the insights and, some of the experiences I've had, and ones that I've known have changed not just my life, but, my family's life and people that I've worked with. And it was done from a point of my changing rather than demanding change from other people. So it's a great privilege to go into all of this.
Excellent, because really, what you're living proof that, the change must come from within. We can't change another person or other people. We must change how we respond to the situations that we find ourselves in with them. And that's absolutely critical. And certainly it's very much in the fore now, certainly in the work I do with my clients. So if we move into the let's say your book, because I've read your book for the second time and I highly recommend it to people, and I've seen it quite differently this time around, which fascinated me. Just different contexts, different perspectives. So in your book, Liz, you speak about how we try at times to control other people and events. Now, in order to stop doing this, you suggest that when we cultivate self-awareness through our own self-reflection, that we're able to see exactly where and why we create the anger. Now, the issue of controlling people has arisen quite a lot during and post-COVID, as the move into working from home and the hybrid working environment has highlighted this aspect of managing and leading. So can I ask you to expand on your suggestion about self-awareness and self-reflection in the context of modern leadership?
Control is the most fascinating topic, because in my own instance, I will say I was a complete control freak.
Right.
Absolutely. And so I needed to understand, why did I need to control? I needed to understand that. So I ended up in the church, literally sitting and praying to God and said, look, I've done everything. I have done everything I know to man to make everybody happy all around me, and they're all miserable. So what is it like? And I was trying to control. I thought I could make people happy. I thought I could make situations and events better. So in my control, I had to understand, why do we control? And we control because we're trying to make our world safe.
Right.
We're trying to keep it risk-free. We're trying to keep it within the familiar. So we try to make other people come around to our way of thinking so they can join our madhouse with us. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's what we do. So when I realized why I was controlling because I didn't want other people to experience the pain that I had experienced in childhood. So I thought, if I could make their lives simpler, happier, or better, or if I could make them do things in the way that I wanted, then we could make the environment, whether it was the work environment or the family environment, we were all going to be happy campers so long as we did it my way. Now, I had no idea that I was such a control freak.
Yeah.
Now, when I self-reflected and saw what I was doing, and I just realized there is only one person in this that has to change, and it was me. The others were fine. They were grand.
And
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. How did you go through the whole self-awareness, self-reflection? What caused you to realize that this is what you had to do?
I read the book Awareness by Anthony DeMello, and basically he just said, please, for God Almighty's sake, would you stop trying to control other people? Would you stop trying to demand that they live their lives as you see fit? Would
Right.
you stop trying to place your expectations of what life is about onto other people? Would you just get off the track and start sorting yourself out and waking up to the fact that you have wounds from the past that are influencing your present? And that's exactly when he said that we were programmed like Windows 98. We download, each and every one of us download a program, and we live through the lens and the filter of that program. And that's what I was doing. I was living through the lens of that, and then trying to control people in the office, in the school, in my family. It was all coming out of that. And it's like if you can keep things okay and safe and all our heads up above water, then everybody's going to be happy according to my rules. But not everybody has the same lens of perception. So that's why it causes so much friction.
Exactly. And in times of modern leadership, especially post-COVID, the leaders really and the managers went from the way they worked with everybody on site, really, pre-COVID, and then post-COVID, they have some people off site, some performing well, some not performing, and they're trying to bring them back to the way it was.
Yeah.
So in this context, then, for the modern leader, um, it's probably, you're probably trying to say to them, step back and take a breath and look at yourself, as opposed to find the fault with everybody else out there.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I will say once, I remember an inspector coming into the school and saying to me, you know, Liz, she said, how did you manage to change the culture in the school? And I just said to her, actually, I didn't change anybody else. I just changed me. I
Mm.
changed how I communicated, and I changed how I began to learn how to respond rather than react. I began to learn how to treat people with respect, not to demand things of people, how to communicate with them effectively, how to create a safe space for them to communicate with me. So all that changed. And she said, oh, Liz, she says to me, that's never going to work. They want they want the others to change. They want the kids to change. They want teachers to change. But I said they do when we learn how to communicate,
Yeah. And
how to talk so people can hear us, learn and allow them talk so we can listen to them.
exactly. So it's about really adopting more of a listening approach and a
Yeah.
questioning approach, and asking them what they think rather than telling them what you see or what you perceive.
Can I
So,
tell you something, Charlie, about
yeah.
what you think, which I think is hilarious? You see, I needed to look at what was going on here because you see, people who control a lot can also be huge rescuers, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Because they're constantly going in there to fix other people, to mind other people, to make sure that everybody is
Or to
happy
fix a problem.
or to fix a problem, right? And people who are rescuers have a very, very favorite feeling, and it's called guilt.
Mm.
Because if they don't do it, it's like they're going to be responsible. They see the need and they're going to be responsible for this person's unhappiness if this person failed at what to do. So then they go in then to try to heal the world and heal everybody. But if the person doesn't react or doesn't respond in the way that they like to, suddenly you're a victim.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And then you get so angry. So there's a triangle going on as to what. So you go from rescuer to victim to being aggressive over all of this thing.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
all the time, you need to stop and say, hang on a minute, this person needs to be responsible for their own job. This person needs to be responsible for their part of a team. What am I doing going in there with my tuppence worth?
Yeah,
But
it's a matter of really stepping back and looking at the triggers, like what's causing
yeah,
us to decide that we know what's best for everybody, and then they're not doing it, and then we get mad because they're not doing it. And I think really for leaders, and certainly in my work, they're not angry at their employees who are not performing. They're angry at themselves
Yeah, they are.
because they
Yeah,
haven't achieved in their context, in the context of being in control. And so that's why I think it's really important for them. And I would agree with you that it's important to step back. And it's really interesting that you mention you change the culture in the school. There are an awful lot of organizations now having to change the culture. And the key message, I think, for them here in this conversation is, step back, look at yourself, look at your role in contributing, and
yes.
try and control less. And it'll have include the employees.
Yeah, it was an interesting one because you see, I didn't have an opinion before.
Mm, mm,
I used to suss out how other people would think, and then I would provide my tuppence worth, right? So really, pleasers and people who are inclined to be a little control freak, like they're very, very good at sussing out the what's going on and then just give them what people really want. So I had to learn a whole new way of communication. I needed to feel the fear and be able to give that opinion.
mm,
And I needed to be able to feel the fear and say, you know, I'm sorry, I don't agree with this.
mm, mm. Yeah.
And be able to hold back. Now, I remember when I read that book first, it said, when you begin to communicate in this way, I mean, your body goes through fear, it goes through quite a lot of emotions because you're not used to communicating honestly. You're not used to challenging people. You're not used to conflict. You've dodged it for so long. And this is bringing you to you being authentic. But
Mm.
as you do this and you do it respectfully, it's very interesting to watch how people can take it from you
They
when
will.
you
Yeah.
when you do it respectfully.
Mm.
Now, when you're in the other control thing, what happens to you is you keep taking on more and more, you get overwhelmed, and then you blow up. And then you give out to yourself because, oh my God, that's not like me to give out like this, or not like me to behave like this. But
Or you get more angry with the others because I
exactly.
think it's safe to say as well, no adult likes to be told what to do. So when you have a leader or a manager who tends to be more controlling, um, the feeling of inclusiveness or being part of a team tends to be diminished. So there are huge benefits from losing the control. Um, a lot of this comes back to the personal characteristics, Liz. So I noticed also you mentioned that when you were in college, your lecturer saw potential in you that you didn't see in yourself, and that you also shied away from promotion when you worked in the banking sector. Now, even today, that happens because people tend to be very self-effacing and they tend to not stand in their own power, perhaps because they don't even recognize it. So the self-awareness will help that as well. So what advice do you have for people at all levels who might not be living their best life due to self-doubt or their own limiting beliefs?
Your key to everything will always be in the relationships that are beside you, that are in front of you. Everything that ever happened in your past it's going to come through your relationships in the present, right? So I discovered then that why did the lecturer say that I had this potential? Because they could actually see it.
Hmm.
However, one of the things that came up for me at that particular time, both in the bank and then I was also married at 21, was you don't outshine the boys. Whatever you don't do that. So
The
you
gender
step
bias
back.
still, this gender bias still exists
It still
in
exists.
a
And
lot
you,
of
you
places.
don't do that. Okay. In my upbringing, and every time when you did succeed, it was, would you ever stop? You're only upsetting other people. Stop going on about that or whatever. So you didn't want to go out there to shine, to put yourself out there front. So that was the way, and that was the way of it. So I found that I was pulling back, stepping back, not feeling good enough, feeling I'm going to anger people if I go for this. Somebody else is going for it. Should they deserve it more? Should they're married with a few kids or whatever it be? And you are all the time in the shadows,
Mm.
all the time in the shadow of your own ability. But this thing of like, people didn't encourage you to go forward then. They didn't encourage you to, or say to you, like those lecturers were great and they could see it. But in a way, I don't think I'd have been prepared to do it. I don't think I was prepared to see it when they were saying. I only began to see it later on when I began to reflect on myself.
True enough, true enough. But for people with any level of self-doubt, that tends to go back to the old paradigms, back to, as you say as well, our upbringing, the early days in school, where you went to school, whether it was single gender or whether it is a mixed school, etc., etc. The teaching and the interactions are all very different. But now we have situations where in organizations, we've many, I think this is the first time there's a potential for 4 different generations to be working in an organization, with Gen Z being the newest. They don't have the same self-doubt that the older generations have. And this is really kind of crippling the leaders, because they don't know how to deal with these young, confident people who have their rights and their expectations of an employer, and they're very, very, very confident in explaining that, compared to the older, more senior colleagues. So I do know from some of my clients that they're beginning to doubt themselves now that they have the ability to actually manage this diversity. And
You know, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one,
yeah,
Charlie, with that, because I saw it within the schools. Because there were young ones coming in with all the bells, the whistles, the interactive whiteboards, you name it, or whatever it be. And they were pushing forward and pushing forward. They would go into staff meetings, they would nearly take over the thing. They were leading the leaders,
yeah,
they were, and whatever. And so it went on. But I needed to be able to stand back, detach, take a look and see the quality of their work, the quality of their relationships with the children.
yeah,
I needed to see that. And in some instance, I could see, though they had all the bells and the whistles, they were still using the old thing and the old parts of shouting at a child if they misbehaved, or punishing a child, or disciplining a child, or whatever.
yeah.
Now, so I was able to kind of go there and very quietly say, you know, every child, every human needs to be treated with respect. Not one of us like to be spoken to in that particular way. And though they had all this technology and all of that, what they didn't have was the expertise I had in relationships.
Mm.
And relationships are where it all boils down to.
So
So it's to be able to get the confidence in yourself that you know how to relate, you know how to communicate, you can step back and see the wonderful qualities that they have, the wonderful experience they have, but at the same time, to be able to get it across, there are other aspects. You are a young head, you will learn these things, but you do need to understand there are other ways of relating.
Exactly. Now, when you talk about relationships there and the old self-doubt and limiting beliefs, I think maybe the most important relationship is a leader's relationship with themselves, how well they know themselves. So we're back to the self-awareness, and to them believing that they actually can manage this diversity, because it will be more and more diverse as we go forward. Um,
Yeah.
and they have to look at their past successes, rather than listen to the doubt. So it really is a case of understanding themselves better, understanding the others, and then finding another way to communicate with them and to bring everybody together.
If they, like, I found to see, the more I was able to see what was holding me back,
Yeah.
the more I was able to see these are patterns from childhood that
Mm.
were passed down. No blame. Parents, teachers at that time, that was the way of it.
And For,
That
for,
was the way.
for every
For,
generation,
for
absolutely.
every generation,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was the way of it. Nothing was done intentionally, but
No,
it
not
happened
its time.
nonetheless, because we're all absorbing what goes on.
Yeah.
So the thing is, the more, see, I needed to, when I would get triggered and get angry, and you could feel it from your toes or whatever, you'd feel if somebody had disrespected. It's at that point I learned to pause. And if I wasn't in a position to address it then, I would say, I find that this has triggered me in some way. I will come back to you over it, or I'll talk to you about it at another time when I've had time to reflect. So I didn't go into it immediately, because if I went into it immediately, you would go into the lift with
Well, it's a
somebody.
knee-jerk reaction
And
rather
immediately-
than rather than
exactly.
a considered one. Yeah.
And you have two egos battling it out.
And nobody
And the other,
the well
exactly.
better that.
Exactly, Charlie. And what I found is that when I stepped back and said that, by the time I actually went to the other person, they had calmed down too.
Yeah.
So you actually learn how to communicate in a way that they can hear you, but you don't have to agree with the other person. The other person doesn't have to agree with you, but you respect each other's opinion. And it's a
Yeah.
much better way of communicating with people, because then they know you hear me and I hear you.
But
That's
more
what
importantly, I think from the self-doubt perspective, they actually have to trust themselves. They have to trust their ability to step into that place.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the more you empty out the old,
You make space for the new.
you make space for the new.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
self-doubt will be there, and you'll say to it, I hear you.
Yeah, but be off.
But be off. You're not going, you know what I mean? I hear you.
Yeah, you no longer serve me, in the present or in the future. So yeah.
Yeah.
That also leads on nicely, I think, Liz, into the leaders who play on the fears of their employees. So where the leader is feared rather than respected or admired, and they tend to be the boss and by default bossy. Now that's another form of control, and it's hugely demotivating. Now, do you think that form of leadership, that leadership style, stems from the leader's own innate fear of failure or their vulnerability, or do you think there's something else that drives that?
It's definitely coming from insecurity. There's no question about it. It's coming from insecurity. And I noticed with one particular leader, his problem really was with women. So if he saw a woman having a voice or succeeding or whatever, that was the time when he'd go in there like in like Flint to put her down or do whatever. So I was curious. And on a day when there was nothing going on or whatever it be, I just happened to ask, did you and your mum get on very, very well? And he explained that she was the most domineering, dictatorial, or whatever it be. So what he was doing was projecting his experience with his mother on women,
on all other females.
on all other females. Now, if we could just investigate, can you imagine his freedom if you realized these females are actually here to help you? They're here to really help make this business go, make this workplace go. They are not your mother. They are not your father. And yet these issues get projected in workplaces when we don't identify them. So bossy, then what happens with very, very controlling bossy leaders, and I could see it as bossy teachers, they may control that environment. But within that environment, the individuals don't take responsibility. They're not accountable for their work because they can now blame bossy boots for doing this.
Well,
So they don't take responsibility. They blame.
Yeah, the blame game gets perpetuated because if you tell me what to do and I do it and it's wrong, well, then it's not my fault. I did what you told me to do. But they also don't take ownership. So being the boss is kind of, it works against the leader and the manager in so many ways. But again, it's taking the time to step back and to ask, how can I change my leadership style?
Yes.
And that, I think, is the dilemma for an awful lot of leaders today. They do understand there is a problem, and they think they're being correct in terms of telling everybody what to do and showing everybody what to do. There is a time and a place for that, for
Yes.
young people or particular situations, but predominantly to get the best out of their people, they really need to lead them, and as opposed to manage with a big stick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're quite difficult for them to make that transition or to even have that awareness about themselves.
Now, even as they go through it and as they begin that process of awareness, of change, because people are used to them being like that. So when you're used to somebody being in that way, and suddenly they're deciding to communicate with you, it's like, hang on a minute, where's he going now with this? And they actually try to pull the person back to where they're familiar with.
Yeah.
So it does take a courageous person who's coming out of that old authority role to take a breather and say, look, I am going through mentoring. I'm going through this. I really do want to make changes here. I'd like to be able to communicate more effectively. And so it goes on. But you will find you will chop and change for a while until eventually it's like any new skill you learn. It's a whole new skill, but it's so much better, Charlie, when you see it within yourself, you recognize it, and you know there's a skill you need to learn. And when you learn it, it's and relationships, it's not just see when you empty this out in you, it's not just in your workplace that things get
No,
better. It's
it's
across the board.
because there's only one of you. Your work and your life are balanced, and that leads very nicely into the leader in the home,
Mm.
because today, and obviously for many years, there are so many leaders and managers who are completely overwhelmed juggling their responsibilities in the home and in the workplace. Now, they seem to assume responsibility for finding and providing solutions to everyone, be it in the home or in the workplace, almost to the point of overcompensating for their overwhelm. So, what advice would you provide, let's say, to parents in these situations? And what parallels then can you draw between their behavior towards their children and towards their employees when they go into the workplace? Because they're not two different people. It's only one person operating in two environments.
When you begin to see within your work environment and you begin to detach and you begin to stand back and you begin to maybe support people but allow them be responsible for themselves, when you do that through a self-reflective awareness, you bring that with you to the home. Now, the more you do for your child, the less the child does for themselves.
Yeah.
The more that child is distant from their authentic self. Because you are doing so much for them, they are now in an image of what you're creating of them. You are flying around the place, getting them into this course, that course, the other course, you name it. They're horse riding, they're juggling, they're doing this, it's gone crazy, right? And you hear it at the school gates of people whose my child is doing this, and you begin to fear, and there's nothing like fear to control you. You begin to fear that maybe your child won't be able to succeed because you don't have them in all of these things. Now, it's actually the worst thing you can do for your child is have them doing too much because there's no space for them to be themselves. There's no space for you to sit back the more you see you and connect with you, the more space you have to see your child as an individual. They are not here on this planet to be mini-me's. They are not here to feed industry. If industry says suddenly it's all going to be science, so therefore they're all going to have to do science, they're all going to have to do something. But I heard a lady say the other day, she's heartbroken her child didn't do what she wanted. And all I could say was, I'm delighted that he was the strength. He really wanted.
I'd say you
You
were
know,
popular.
my God, I
Yeah,
was very
but it is a fair point,
very-
because it's if we only have clones of ourselves, you know, that there's no, it doesn't help with the diversity, because this may have worked particularly in Ireland and other similar countries years ago when we're an island. So our population only became very, very diverse, and our workforce as a result became very, very diverse, maybe in the last 2 decades, maybe a little longer, but only that. So it worked to an extent prior to that. But now we have all of this rich tapestry of cultures and um, people and thought processes, and oh, it's just fantastic. But we kind of don't know where we fit in our own country per se. And this has caused an awful lot of uh, the overwhelm as well. It's guiding, leading, not knowing where we fit. It's maybe a sense of, to some extent, losing our identity. And that can happen also in the workplace, because the employees are very diverse in a lot of workplaces. And there are very different cultures and very different behaviors that come with it. And the leader is overwhelmed in terms of, oh my goodness, like, you know, the rules are set, but not everybody understands it in the same context. Not everybody behaves in the same context. And there's a language barrier as well. So the overwhelm is quite remarkable, you know, and even in the life of a child, they have new friends from various other countries that they would not normally have had. So it is quite interesting. The parallels are quite interesting, but it's almost like the leader, in the same way as the parent, they need to take their foot off the pedal of guiding and directing.
Yes.
They may need to step back and observe how they're managing themselves, because most certainly children will find their way, whether they speak the same language or not. And I do believe employees working together on the floor, or, you know, in the organization, they find a way to work together. I
We
think
do.
yeah, I think it's the leader's belief, whether it's in the home or in the workplace, that they need to show everybody or tell everybody what to do. That's not always the case.
When my grandkids went out to live in Australia,
Yeah.
the first thing that was told, it's clear they were being told what to do within their education system. It's clear that it wasn't being drawn out, that there are various skills, that the child didn't know how to work in a team,
Wow.
that didn't, because they were so used to being given the information.
Mm.
They weren't part of extracting the information. So therefore, when they have no involvement in their own learning, they're being handed stuff all the time. So in the home, children need to connect. They need to feel they belong. Now, this I have seen going on at the moment is that many parents won't ask their kids to lift a finger because they have to study, they have to do this, that, and the other. Therefore, they are lodgers in their own house. So you have both parents going out working, doing all this thing, providing all these things. But what do the children? They're part of this team in the same way as you're part of a team at work.
Mm.
But when children are actually involved and they feel, of course they're going to grumble if they have to put the bins out. That's a normal child. But it definitely helps them to feel that they have a part to play in the overall well-being of the family.
And
It really,
yeah,
and therefore, when you go through, is like, what is it that this child is good at? Therefore, follow that through and support it, rather than to be doing this, that, the other, because somebody says this is good, that's good. To be able to sit down and say, this is what we can do. This is our budget. This is what we can do.
no,
And
it's the parallel is really interesting, because you mentioned there the child feeling part of the team in the home. And you also mentioned that they feel they make their connections, they make it in their own way, they're more than capable, and they have that sense of belonging. And these are the two critical components of employee engagement. And it's quite interesting that employee engagement seems to be at quite a low level. And because they don't feel part of the team, they don't feel that they actually belong. And while they might try, it's the culture of an organization that can be quite demotivating and restrictive. And that will come from the leadership in the same
And
way it will come in the home.
yeah, true. And in a classroom, when the children
Yeah.
feel part of the whole well-being of something. And you know another thing, children are amazing. They are amazing. They were my teachers, right? But there were days, and you be honest with them. One, children are not your therapists, so therefore you don't offload adult things onto them. But the other thing too is there were days, maybe if I were going through a difficult time with something that's going on, and I would just say to them, you know what, kids, today I'm not 100%. If I seem a little bit cranky or whatever, just know it's nothing to do with you guys, right? On those days, those kids, if I didn't say something and opened up and be honest, right? They would sense there's something wrong and they would give me hell. The days I was honest with them were the days those kids would say, do you want a cup of tea, miss?
Mm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was amazing to watch that when you weren't offloading anything on them, you're just saying, I'm under a bit of pressure. I might be a little bit tetchy today. It's nothing to do with you lads. Let's see how it goes. And it was amazing to watch.
Yeah, and you know that can the same can be said when you talk about the body language component of face-to-face communication in the workplace.
Yes,
When you come in and there is something troubling you, it can be seen in your body, in your facial features, in even in how you might enter the office or the
yes,
workplace. And if you don't comment on it, people will simply avoid you. So rather than coming together in this community or sense of belonging in the workplace, people are going, whoops, can't talk to her or him today because they're going around like a bear.
that's right.
So it's the whole role of communication, but also I believe trusting and giving everybody an input and kind of working in an inclusive manner that will actually help leaders, be it in the home or in the workplace, deal with the overwhelm or reduce it and not feel they have to assume that responsibility for everybody everywhere at all times. That really isn't the role.
No,
Uh,
it isn't.
it's not. But then that kind of brings me to the next point I'd like to raise with you, Liz, because you mentioned our perception of our roles. And if they're not clear to us as leaders and managers, particularly now in the post-pandemic world of hybrid working, it can be hugely damaging to the leader themselves who doesn't quite know what is expected of them, and even more so the employees, because the leader will not be able to communicate it down the line. So, from your experience, what advice around perception would you give the leaders of today? Because it's their perception of their role today that can also be causing difficulty.
Because their perception has them feeling they're responsible for everything.
Okay.
I'd say it's that thing of feeling over responsible is probably the one that gives the most trouble to anybody in any leadership position because they feel that the buck stops completely with them. However, when they're able to communicate, it's difficult right now. It's definitely difficult post COVID because
Yeah.
it's the old paradigm of everybody working in the office to now people being at home and trying to see what way can you communicate with them. So it is a whole new way of communicating. I think if you could feel I need to look and see what is it I'm really responsible for and what is it is not mine, and to be able to pass that down the line. So as a leader you need to have a vision, you need to see where you're going, you need to see all of that, but the micromanaging needs to be a little bit further down the line.
Way,
So
way
it's
down, yeah.
being able to weigh down, it's being able to detach, because as a leader if you're constantly feeling responsible for everything you're going to get burnt out very, very quickly. So it's that ability to say and define what is my role as a leader. My role is to have the vision, it's to be able to guide, it's to be able to put in the supports for people. But it's not to be supporting them on the ground and say, you know what I mean? That is further down the line.
Yeah.
And then each individual person within the group, as a leader, I would be supporting them in finding their own self leadership
No,
so that
yeah.
you do not have the overload. See, when each person is responsible for the self, when each person does their own inner work and leads themselves, you don't have the overwhelm at the top.
Exactly, but it's also they need to understand it's their perception of their role, so they need to clarify.
Yes,
I know in a lot of my work, be it in the training room or with the boards of directors or with private individuals when I'm mentoring them, the conversation comes up, and I often have the discussion around understanding your role. And if you're not comfortable, and if you say, well, my job description says I have to do this, this, and this, but I don't do all of that, I do a little bit of this as well. I will always challenge them nicely and say, so why don't you rewrite your job description to fit the work you do rather than a perception of what that position is supposed to do? Because,
yes,
everybody, we all deal with people. You deal with your colleagues, you deal with your customers, you deal with your superiors, you deal with your suppliers, your partners, etc., etc. But things change, and there is such a phenomenal chasing of technology now. No, the human being cannot keep up with technology, but we're all under dreadful pressure in some organizations more than others to chase the technology. And the people are getting forgotten in that. So I will always challenge leaders to define your role, define what it is you do exactly, who you do it for, why you do it, and then redefine the job description. And then, okay, you have to go up the line and you have to engage with HR, etc. But it's this thing of being shoehorned into a box of a job description that's
yes.
no longer fit for purpose. And that's how the perception of the role, I find, sometimes gets muddied. It gets very foggy for individuals. So it's all about, well, step up and take ownership and be accountable for saying, I think this job description better reflects what I do.
And the other thing too is their perception could be somebody else's perception.
But it
That
usually is. It's usually
it,
coming
it,
from somewhere
from,
else,
yeah,
or from this is a 5-year-old job description. But my goodness, post-COVID, I imagine a huge percent of job descriptions worldwide could be rewritten now to
yeah.
to facilitate the hybrid working environment. So it's really interesting that the perception is something that people are they're a little reluctant to challenge it.
But you see, any perception when you do any of this work on yourself, right? Like we're inclined to think your perception was the right perception, was whatever. And then when you begin to challenge a perception, now sometimes you will have somebody that sees a perception and they will say, that really needs to change. However, down the line, they don't want to change.
Oh,
So
completely.
completely. So you are now into being able to change the perception in such a way that they can take it down the line. And it reminds me of that story of this man who was trying to force feed his dog with cod liver oil, and the dog was having none of it. And then when he knocked the cod liver oil onto the ground, the dog licked it. So it'll always be, when you go to change a perception, it'll always be, how do you communicate this change to the others that are down there in a way that they feel that they're being listened to, that they're being valued, that their point of view has been taken, that they're being heard. People just need to feel they're being heard. And
Mm.
then after that, for the most part, they have no problem with your perception so long as they feel they're being heard.
Yeah, because they feel part of the solution, not just here you are. This is, the diktat has come from on high, and you need to do that. Whereas they all have brains, and I think also we need to get people to think differently at all levels and to feel they can contribute to the organization. Yeah, at whatever level they're at.
Yeah,
Everybody has a role to play.
yeah, absolutely. And when the more See, the more you are comfortable with who you are, the more you are comfortable with being able to talk to people, being able to listen to them, being able to do these things, you don't worry about controlling them anymore.
You don't feel the need to control
You
them.
don't feel the need to control them
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And the more you don't feel the need to control them, and the more they do, the happier they are. I've always found that within it, that the more they were capable of doing, the more they were capable of being responsible for their team, their stuff, whatever it is, they were a much happier crew.
Yeah, the more they liked it. Yeah.
The more they liked it.
Yeah.
You know, so you didn't have people leaving because they got bigger money someplace else. They
Yeah.
got them because they were happier at work.
It's that they're not valued, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Liz, just as we're kind of coming to the end of the, I won't say our interview, more our conversation, which has been really enjoyable. Do you have any other words of wisdom for the leaders of today and tomorrow, based on your own journey? Excuse me.
My biggest takeaway for myself was to stop judging myself. Stop giving myself such a hard time. And when I began to see just through the small changes, and I know that the minute you begin to reflect on you, within 3 weeks, you'll see change, right? So go easy, take it slowly. Don't give yourself such a hard time. There will be ups and downs in it because remember, as you
Yeah.
are changing now, this has gone on for generations.
Yeah.
So you can't be expected to change in a week or in a year. Stuff that's gone on for generations.
Yeah.
So
be gentle with yourself is the word.
be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Take time out. Take time away from other people.
Yeah.
Just take time out. Do something. Do something that fills your heart. Do something that you totally enjoy. Because when you're a control freak, the one thing you are not very good at, and it's experiencing joy. Because you're too busy fussing over everybody else.
I really love that, and I love that we will finish up on that very positive note. So, Liz, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, and I want to thank you very much for joining me and for sharing your insights and your wisdom based on your experience. Now, I know there are many nuggets of advice in our conversation, which will be hugely beneficial for leaders and managers at all levels, in all situations. Now, I really do hope you enjoyed our conversation today. If any of you have any questions or would like further information on anything Liz and I have discussed, please do email me at charlie@charlieswords.com, and I'll be very happy to speak with you. So thank you all for listening, and until the next time, thank you very much. And Liz, thank you again.